thing's been an anvil for me, man. This is motor number 4, training number 3.
Nice.
Welcome back to the Hardway Garage South. This is my 66 C10 Chevy pickup that I call Kermit. Got a lot of work into this thing. The motor and tranny came out of my 2005 GTO I bought brand new. Right before we had to load it on the trailer here, this thing started making some real bad top end noise, so I had to pull it apart and see what was wrong. So after a quick tow in from my K5, we knew that the noise was coming from the top passenger side of the motor. I was kind of expecting it to be a bad rocker, but it turns out it was a broken valve spring, which led to some other damage. So once I got the passenger side head off, obviously we got all the push rods out and the rockers. I decided that I was going to pull both sides off just to see if anything else had happened, and then also replace most of these parts. I think this motor has somewhere around 180,000 on it, so I really wanted to make sure that everything was all right. The valve dropping into the cylinder left a little bit of an eyebrow, but I didn't think it was anything too bad. The valve is definitely bent. There's no way it ever would have sealed, and I'm really glad I ended up taking the head off right away instead of taking my chances. Here's a good trick to make a cleaning solution. It's 1 part's acetone to 1 part's transmission fluid. Tranny fluid's a natural detergent, so when you mix these two together, and a Scotch-Brite pad really does a good job of cleaning up aluminum, steel, any surface really cuts the grind down and makes quick work of it. Once the heads were off, I went through and fully disassembled and cleaned everything up. I only ended up replacing 1 valve, the one that was bent. Everything else was just lapped and reinstalled with new comp cams parts, including springs, keepers, and valve guide seals. Here's a pretty good way to remove your valve springs. You can take a 13/16 wrench, drill a hole in it, and then carefully use the bolt that holds a rocker arm to compress and remove your keepers. Now, I've always been told to soak the lifters overnight before installing them, so I went ahead and did it this time. Used the same oil I intended on running in the motor when it was ready to go. Now, ARP and their directions would tell you to chase the threads for your head bolts. I didn't have a thread chaser. They're kind of expensive, so I just took one of the old bolts and cut these grooves into it and then cleaned any burrs off with a wire wheel, and I ran them down into the head bolts. I did this for the smaller ones that go along the top underneath the intake manifold, and it seemed to clear them out really well. Dropping the lifters into an LS motor is pretty easy. These trays all seem to just kind of make the whole job pretty quick. You lock them into these trays and then drop them down. Run around and torque the 10mm bolts that hold them in place, and that locks everything down for you. I ended up cleaning everything one more time, of course, just to make sure, and I used AC Delco MLS gaskets. They're marked for front and rear. I dropped the heads on, torqued everything down. There is a sequence you want to follow. It's something that's really easy to find online, and it'll tell you the sequence to do it and the torque settings that you need as well. One of the main upgrades that I wanted to make was replacing the old rocker arms. There's bearings in there that can fail, and then they run throughout the motor, causing havoc. And I upgraded to these Michigan Motorsports rocker arms that come with new bolts. They give you a good set of directions on how to install them. Everything went pretty smooth. Now it's time to throw everything back together. Throw the intake on, the valve covers, get everything installed, torque down to proper specs, and hopefully this thing will start. When I first put this motor and tranny in this truck, I used the fan shroud from my GTO, and one of the fans had stopped working. It was the smaller of the two, so I ended up replacing the smaller fan with a 12-inch SPAL electric fan, and some new fan controllers, as well as a bunch of weather pack connectors. But this was a huge upgrade, and I actually run the cooling system on this fan right now because it's much quieter than the old original one. So it's finally time to give it a start. I cycled the key on and off a bunch of times, hopefully to build some pressure up in the fuel rails. This way the thing would fire right up. And a couple turns of the key, and off it went. Truck runs great. I've been driving Kermit all over the place lately. No problems to report, plenty of oil pressure. It seems to run better than it ever did. Thanks again for watching. From the Hardway Garage South, we'll see you next time.
Light them. We got a car trailer.